Today we're building this Huret Luxe derailleur. Make sure you have the right one. It'll just say Huret right here. These don't really have a specific indication that says Luxe on it. But yeah, this is definitely a really unique derailleur. These are pretty rare, and they have their own little quirks and features. I swear I'm not Doug tomorrow. Some tools you're gonna need are a 9mm wrench, a flathead screwdriver, some Allen keys, and some pliers. Now when removing the claw hanger bolt, it can be super tight, so you can try to do it with a 6mm bolt over here, but there's also a 17mm bolt on the other side. I would use a wrench if this one isn't really stuck, and then just go ahead and screw it off. Yeah, so get this bolt off with a 17mm wrench, and then the claw will just unscrew from the bolt. It also has a super thin washer in between. Now with this guide pulley here and the spring, you may think that you should probably take off this screw right here, this flathead screw, but it's way too big, super shallow, it's going to strip easily. So if you lift up the cage, parallelogram, you can see there's a bolt right there, so you want to get an 8mm wrench and unscrew that. And also use some WD-40 because it could be stuck. Alright, so once you took that little bolt off in there, this flathead screwdriver should be pretty easy to unscrew, and the whole assembly will just come apart. Alright, so once you've taken it apart, you'll see this little housing here. Then you pop out the spring, and then this pulley just unscrews like this from the cage. Alright, so now it's time for cleaning, and I'm assuming that this derailleur is in really greasy, rough shape. So you want to use some heavy degreaser or cleaner, or you could also use a brush. But yeah, also the pulleys are sealed bearings, so I'll show you how to service those in just a moment. As for the parallelogram itself, I would take out the limit screws. I also took out the clamp bolt, don't forget about that. You can technically take this apart, but what you have to remember is the spring, which is in here, is under very high tension, and having taken apart one of these front derailleurs before, I can tell you that it's insanely difficult to get back together because the spring's under very high tension, and your hands and fingers will be in immense amount of pain while doing it, unless you have some insane clamping devices. So what I would probably do is loosen these bolts slightly, spray some degreaser in there, maybe oil it up a little bit. I'm going to be using the ultrasonic cleaner, so I'm going to just loosen these, let it sit in there, do its magic, and then put some oil on it and tighten it back up. Alright, so now servicing the pulleys. Remember, this one is the guide pulley, the one with the threads right here, and this one is the tension pulley. So they're both the same, and let's go and service them. So when you unscrew this, you will find that there are bearings inside. So I'm just going to do it over this little lid here so they don't roll off and get lost. Ask me how I know. Alright, so once you screwed it off, you'll see there's a bunch of bearings in here. They're always just going to fall out. Alright, so once you've unscrewed your pulleys, you want to clean off the inside. You want to clean off this. So we're going to put all this in the ultrasonic cleaner. But if you don't have one, of course you can use some degreaser. You don't use anything harsh on the outside because I'm pretty sure this is rubber here, and the seal as well. But yeah, make sure to get the surface especially nice and clean. And in my case, I'm using this ultrasonic cleaner, and all I'm using is water and dish soap. Alright, so now all the parts of the pulleys are nice and cleaned down. Make sure you get the groove on the inside. The main thing you want to do is clean the sides because that's where the bearings actually ride on. Now you want to grease up the inside of the pulley nice and good. Then you want to clean down your bearings and just start putting them in. Alright, so now once you got all the bearings in place, You want to find out which one is the guide pulley, which one is the tension pulley. The guide pulley will just be more marred and scuffed up, as you can see, because it changes the gear and it rubs up against the chain more, so it gets worn out quicker. So yeah, we're going to put the shorter bolt in here because it's for the tension pulley. Alright, so once your pulley is together, remember you don't want to tighten this too much because it will be held together by the bolt in the cage. And after that, you also want to spin it around a little bit because a lot of excess grease is going to come out of this edge, and you don't want that to happen while you're riding. Alright, so finally, after 3 rounds of ultrasonic cleaning, this thing is finally all nice and clean. I also used some Quick-Glo on some of the chrome parts. And another thing you're going to need for the assembly is grease. Alright, so starting off, you want to grab your guide pulley. It's going to have a little more thread right here on the edge, and you want to put it on the opposite side of these 2 little pins. Just want to grab the other side and it'll just screw right in. And again, make sure it spins nice and smooth. Make sure it's not too tight because the bolt will keep it in place. Alright, so now attaching the actual parallelogram to the cage. First of all, you want to make sure you've tightened all the bolts back up and oiled up all the little joints if you loosen them in the first place. And if you didn't, it's always a good idea to oil them up just so they last longer and move smoother. Alright, next step is you want to grab your outer cage, then you want to grab a bolt, you want to grease it up a little bit, and then just go ahead and stick it right through. Alright, now you want to grease up this area a little bit. You want to grease up the shaft as well. Don't do too much because that will attract a lot of dirt. Now grab your spring. You want to make sure this little pin faces up, and you want to put it right after the second post. Then you want to pop in this other little bushing here. Make sure you grease that up as well, top and bottom side. Now here comes the tricky part. You have to attach the cage to the parallelogram. I would use a flathead screwdriver from the other side because remember, this pin has to match with that little hole right in there, and you don't want this whole thing moving around while you're doing it. So yeah, you can start off by just going like this around with the parallelogram, but then after that, when the spring gets close, you want to start using a flathead screwdriver from this side. So what you do is you lift up the cage and you can screw it in right on top of there. And what you can do, you can keep the cage open if you tighten some of these pivot bolts, and the cage will just stay open like this if you tighten them hard enough. Alright, so I got it in a spot where it stays up nice like this. Make sure the bolt is all the way screwed in, and put on this little nut. Alright, so when you got the body like this in this position with the bolt exposed, you're going to have 2 bolts which are really similar. You have a bigger one and a smaller one. You want to use the smaller one and screw it onto that shaft. Alright, so yeah, just tighten down this bolt right here. I swear it's so much easier to do with this cage just up out of the way. Alright, so once you got this screwed on, you can loosen up these bolts again. Make sure parallelogram moves nice and smooth. And also now is a good time to put in this little limit screw here, because as you see, this could rub on that little spring, and if you don't put that in, that will catch on it. Alright, so now from here on it should be pretty straightforward. Grab your pulley, slide it on, and then you want to grab your bolt and just put a little bit of grease on it and slide it in. Again, make sure the pulley spins nice and smooth, and if it doesn't, you want to unscrew the actual nut on the pulley and then just put it back on. An easy way to do this is you just grab it, unscrew it a little bit, and if you hold this side with one finger, and the other side you can just kind of, so you can just move the other side and it'll unscrew and it'll spin nice and smooth. It should have it like a little to no play. So yeah. Alright, so when putting on the bolt for the claw, you grab your spring right here, move it all the way around, then put it on the looser setting, and then if you want to put it back after you put it on, just grab it like this, put it behind the cage, and this will be the tighter setting. Alright, now so when putting on the claw, you want to put a little bit of grease on the outside here, you want to put a little bit on the inside and a little bit on the other side as well. Grab your bolt, slide it on in, and you want to grab your claw and you want to slide on this little washer as well. and go ahead and screw it on. And also don't forget you want this little hole right here to line up. And then on the back side, just grab your big 17mm nut and screw it on. Alright, so after you've done that, all you want to do now is just put in this little claw clamp bolt. Then you want to screw in your clamp pinch bolt and you have your limit screws in, and after that you have yourself a fully rebuilt derailleur. Servicing this derailleur was a pretty fun experience. You don't really see these with the long cages that often. I assume this was used for like a touring purpose, but what I can tell you is that these are really well made and they should last a pretty long time. Be careful though, when I got it, it was bent twice in the parallelogram and once on the limit screw. If you want to use this derailleur, go right ahead. Just remember to play around with little pivot bolts to make it smoother. Also, shout out to Bike Exchange for lending me this project. They're a local non-profit shop here in San Jose. They do also a lot of vintage bikes. I'll have a link for their website in the description. So remember guys, if you have an old derailleur, don't replace it, just rebuild it. Thanks to anyone who subbed, and I'll see you in the next one.